Welcome to Chapter 1. This is Fundamentals of Network Security. Uh, this is our introductory chapter. We're going to be going over a lot of basics here. So as we move on, we're going to go ahead and talk about a number of things that you may or may not have already covered in previous courses. This should go side by side with your textbook, so I may elaborate on a few things from your textbook, and I may just ramble on about other things, such as personal experience and other things with regard to that to help expand your learning process. So the first thing we're going to talk about are our learning objectives. The first one is to explain the fundamental concepts of network security, and this covers the key concepts of network security and the 7 domains of the typical IT infrastructure, the network security goals, internal and external network issues, network security components used to mitigate threats throughout the IT infrastructure, the basics of TCP/IP. So what is network security? The control of unwanted intrusion to the use or damage of communication of a computer network. Well, duh. So, yeah, this includes anything that's connected. Uh, as most of you know already, we're all connected to the internet, either through this online course, through our correspondence, through our cell phones communication, to our data, traveling, via email, through SFTP, through your applications. A lot of these things need to have security involved with that. And we're going to cover that here. And security topics include monitoring for abuses, such as people trying to steal your data and stuff like that. Looking for protocol errors, so if something is inefficiently configured or leaking or damaged or something out there, we're going to have a lot of errors in the protocol, and that could end up, causing, why is this connection going so slowly? Why is my upload not working right? These could be protocol errors that could be occurring on your transmission wire or something. The way they negotiate a lot of different things, from session negotiation to the maximum transmission unit set on a TCP packet. We can also look at blocking non-approved transmissions and responding promptly to problems and accurately addressing them. So these are some concepts of network security. So basically, network security, it's essential to our communication necessary to the organization's mission and goals. If people in a business are not communicating, whether by instant message, by Slack, or another application for collaboration, then business breaks down. If, say, you have a salesperson out in the field working with a customer and they need to look up, say, information about inventory or sales prices or time to delivery of a product, this could severely impact a organization's competitive advantage in operating its business. Network security also uses the mechanisms to avoid unapproved use of resources. So, what if that salesperson is trying to, say, give information, or look up, how much commission his other colleagues are making, or something like that? That would be, unapproved resources, or using access to, let's say, financial data, if he wants to make, short sale or something like that of stocks, insider trading, other things like that. So we prevent people from accessing data that they shouldn't have access to. The integrity of information traversing the network. This makes sure that the data has not been tampered with as it traverses from the source to the destination. So we do not want to see data that is manipulated while in transit or while it is in motion. So we do that. the integrity of data as it's going through the network must be preserved. Uh, it's essential to say that we can trust our mechanisms of communication. For instance, if any of you have ever played that game where somebody, lines up on one side of you and whispers something in your ear, and then you must tell it to the person next to you, and tell it to the next person, 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 and down the line, you finally get a message that no longer represents the uh, original message that was inputted. That's one place where, the integrity of that messages has not been uh, kept. So the message has no integrity at that point. Um, Prevents unauthorized access and actions. Again, preventing somebody from accessing a resource or anything that they should not access or do something they should not do, such as you know a bank teller going in there, logging into a firewall and rebooting it. You would say that that person would not be authorized or qualified to do something like that. That could be disruptive to a business. So we try and prevent uh, access controls like that to those who are not there. Supports desirable activities such as accessing inventory and stuff. This goes to availability. So we want to make sure what resources are available to said employees need to be maintained available quickly, clearly, and have that integrity to go along with that. So we want to make sure that they enable quick and easy access to resources for those services and users. They want to support the missions and goals of the business. You want to enforce the organization's network security policies. And we want to support the workers in their jobs and protect against compromise, maintain high performance, and keep costs to a minimum. I.e., let's keep the security breaches down so business can keep operating and everyone plays and stays within the rules that are made by the organization for that and the use of their equipment, and make sure that everyone is there to be there to help the business succeed and them to be successful employees themselves. So one thing we have to talk about is trust. So trust is the confidence in your expectation that others will act in your best interest. You might see this on a quiz coming up, so keep that one in mind. And you also have to have the belief that others are trustworthy. So confidence. So what establishes trust? Um, in my life classes, I ask how many people know each other, and a lot of them, most everybody doesn't know other people. So I'm gonna ask you, how well do you trust your classmates in here? So many of you are like, well, I don't know them. So if you don't know somebody, are you going to really have that trust with them? A lot of people are going to say no, they don't have that trust in them, but they are going to, they might have a little trust, and that's what you call semi-trusted or something like that. As you start to get rapport and build, information exchanges with them and understand their security postures and attitudes, you can believe others can become trustworthy also once they have proven themselves. Now, with computer networks, trust is the confidence that others will act in accordance with your organization's security rules, corporate mission, and vision. So, does this mean that's a good question. What does this mean? Well, a lot of it actually comes down to it where you're looking at your business to business partners out there, whether they're going to be connecting into your network to say maybe connect to your API and do order entry into your system. Let's say it's a contractor or a vendor that you're utilizing that they connect into, let's say, maintain, equipment. Or it could be, contractors you hire. These are things that you have to have that confidence that they will not abuse your networks. They will not try and do things that are violating a lot of issues that occur in your network. So these are a lot of things of what this computer trust vision and all that is. So what is trust? Trust is permission and privilege. And permission is the authorization to access an asset. So am I allowed to go to a network file, share, and access all the folders? Well, I have to be granted permission, and that is usually done by somebody higher up in the chain than myself. They will say, yes, this person is authorized to do that, and they have our permission to grant access or gain access to an asset. Now let's define an asset real quick. An asset can be anything from actually a physical device, or it could be even data. Data can be an asset itself. So that's something there. Privilege means, are you granted that ability to work on a network? So these are permissions that are applied to you. So yes, what is my privilege to this access of the data? Can I edit it out? That means, do I have write access to it? Or am I only able to read it and not modify it? So like when I first started in a company, I was allowed to read all the policies of the company, the network policy, the behavioral policy, how to behave at work, all these different things. And the longer I worked there and the more uh, well known and trust I established with my peers and my managers and other management higher up the chain, they looked to me to help recreate and write some of the policies. So I got put on a committee where I go in there and now I help write policies for our company. So these are some of the things that we see out there where I have been granted elevated privileges or higher privileges than others. Another example of a higher privileges, okay, I can, I'm a low level person. I just started out. I am able to view firewall rules on a firewall. Next thing you say, well, okay, I can change rules on a firewall, or I can modify and create and add new rules. That's part of my role. You could be granted that permission. Eventually, as I've been proven trustworthy, I can be given more responsibility and more privilege to where I could become a system administrator where I might be called on to reboot a system, or modify the configuration of the underlying system and stuff like that, apply patches and stuff. So these are different abilities granted on a network for permissions. So an example of a third-party trust system is we can look at digital certificates. So how many of you have ever gone out and visited a website and seen that it starts with HTTPS? Well, that HTTPS usually indicates that it is established at Transport Layer Security or TLS connection. The TLS connectivity is based on public certificate authorities. So if you look, there should be like a little icon or something in the upper right hand corner, and you can actually see like a certificate there. If you click on it, and you can see the level of cascading certificates down, if any of you have ever looked at that. The top level certificate is called your certificate authority. Now, this has the inherent trust of the internet to provide security. They have been granted by a coalition of other companies and government agencies the ability to create and issue certificates within a certain aspect or domain. So as these are established, they can issue certificates to users or to websites, and they can be used to establish what's called a public key infrastructure communication style, in which they would enable cryptographic measures to establish data integrity and data confidentiality as it travels between two systems that have no trust within each other. So we have a web user here and a web commerce e-server, let's say, uh, you know, xyzabc.com or something like that. And you want to go out and buy some new little thing from them. They've never heard of you. You've never bought from them before, but you want to make sure you can trust them also. So what happens is you go over here and they have a public certificate, or they have a certificate issued by a public certificate authority. Say, let's say DigiCert or Entrust or GoDaddy or something like that. You have that, you trust their public CA. You can go down here and say, okay, I'm going to encrypt my stuff with you and create a key. I'm going to encrypt a private, a public key, and I'm going to encrypt it with your public key and send it to you. You're going to decrypt it, and we're going to negotiate a trust for that session of communication. Well, that's kind of how that TLS connectivity works in a very broad, basic nutshell. I don't want to elaborate on it too much because that could end up making this lecture a lot longer than what it already is going to be. So then we have to determine who or what is trustworthy. So we have to determine if we're going to trust others on a conditional basis or maybe a permanent basis. And we may offer trust based on the reputation of that third party. For instance, in that certificate association, that CA, certificate authority rather, that is our top level thing. Based on its reputation, we know that there's some good ones out there. If a CA gets compromised, you're going to see a lot of those certificates get revoked from the public trust, and they will be removed by other authorities. Your ISP, they'll say stop using them because we no longer trust them. So the reputation of a third party, such as a certificate authority, is very important, especially with doing other businesses. You know, if you want to do business with a company that has a semi-good reputation like Amazon, they're known to do sell you products that are good, all that, and you know they might have something there, but in essence, they stand behind what they sell. They do this. Walmart also has stuff like that. You can do grocery stores like Kroger and HEB or whatever you want to do that can also offer these trustworthy merchant services. And they have a good reputation for that. But others say, like Temu.com. Temu is known for providing equipment and communications that have, for instance, had spyware on it. They're known for selling stuff that is not quite as good, quality products that are sourced from less than reputable sources in foreign countries. And although their advertising looks great, when the product is actually delivered, it's actually quite lacking quality or something. And so this is just by a reputation that they have that, you know, that could be there that is like, well, we offer something cheap, but the quality is even less cheap. So conditional trust, you know, you want to try out somebody or something like that. You can provide them with some access and trust until they've earned their trust, basically. So you may have told their trust the rules have been violated, and trust stems from actions in the past and based on future behaviors. You know, if they, you know, hey, they sent you something cruddy. Like, I've gotten some junk from Amazon before, and I've notified them, you know, and I'm like, hey, I ordered from Amazon Home Delivery for food, and, you know, the fruit was kind of messy, you know, didn't good. And like, okay, give us another chance. Poof. Next time, I started getting better and better quality produce from them. And so now I'm starting to build a little bit better trust with that, you know, Amazon Grocery or one of these home delivery grocery places. So remember that trust is subjective based on one's own perspectives. It's tentative and it can change over time. So something goes great, we've all had that friend that all of a sudden we have a disagreement with, and now you can no longer trust them. So good analogy for that. So what are the security objectives we have? Security objectives, these are goals an organization tries and strives to achieve through its security efforts. And the three primary security objectives, and if you're ever going to study for your CISP, these are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality basically equates to privacy, integrity uh, equates to non-repudiation, and availability is kind of self-explanatory, but it also represents uptime of systems and how long they're going to be available. So confidentiality, it's basically the protection of your preventing unauthorized access, allows authorized users to access resources without obstruction. You have integrity, which is the protection against unauthorized changes. And, like somebody, you want to prevent somebody from tampering or modifying anything, but you allow authorized changes by authorized users to occur. So you don't want to, let's say, you're working on your report and you forget to lock your computer and your 6-year-old younger sibling, child, or whatever comes in, types, just starts smashing the keyboard, hits save, and then then you scroll down and you look like you're continuing where you want. Well, you don't have integrity in your paper because somebody just did some keyboard mashes and you missed it, and you submitted a paper with some keyboard mashes. So you don't have integrity for that right access because, you know, obviously your younger sibling, child, or whatever was not authorized to modify your homework. And so that would be something you need to watch out for. Availability. This is the protection against uptime or the loss of data or blocking access to something. You're protecting it. You're making sure it's always available or accessible when needed. So that's pretty much what availability is in a nutshell. And authentication is a really important concept to grab and grasp right now. Authentication is proof or verification of a user's identity, and that is before you grant them access to a secured area. So uh, this is where you're asking people to prove who are you in reality. So if you ever go to cash a check, and I know that's a foreign concept for some of you, they would ask you for your identity. If you ever want to go to a bank and withdraw money from your bank, they would probably ask for some form of identity or something like that before you access your account to prove who you were. So these are some things that are really important to grasp concepts of. Authorization and access control. So once you granted identifying who they are, you got to make sure that they have the permission to do what they want. So are you allowed to do something? Now I know who you are. Is this person allowed to do these things? Are they allowed to go in this top secret room? Are they allowed to uh, badge in to any classroom and unlock classroom doors or something? These are some concepts there. And these include things called discretionary access control, which means every asset has a distinct list of users that are allowed that access and what they can and cannot do. Read, write, execute are some of them. Then there's some things called mandatory access controls, which says, like, for instance, if you look at an operating system, you can see a lot of system components have mandatory access control, which are like system only, which means you cannot add user permissions to overwrite and modify any of them. And then you have like role-based access control, so saying, okay, if you're a member of, let's say, an administrator group, you would have these access controls say like manage, a firewall. And you can manage any of the firewalls in there as long as you're a member of this firewall administrators group. Okay. So this has the concept of need to know, and it's based on user job descriptions and such as that. So it's restrictions based on who you are and also what you're allowed to do, basically your permissions. Now we go to the concept of non-repudiation. This means that, you know, it prevents somebody from saying, no, that wasn't me. This is usually really pertains to logging mostly. So if I do something and it's logged, can I go into the log and delete that log or modify it by removing my, username saying, hey, Brennan accessed the root file system and upgraded this file. And I'm like, well, I don't want nobody to know I did that. So I go in the logs and I find that log entry that says I did that. Am I allowed to delete that? If I am, we don't have non-repudiation. Repudiation basically means plausible deniability. No, I didn't have anything to do with that. Where you can sometimes hear in some of these court trials where, no, 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 that was done by a hacker, or somebody did that, If there's plausible deniability or something, no, they stole my username and password because my password was uh, PASSWORD was my password and they guessed it. Yeah, you don't have, there's, you can't prove non-repudiation in those instances. You can prove incompetence, but not non-repudiation. So you in there. Uh, then we get down to privacy. Privacy protects the confidential integrity and availability of personally identifiable or sensitive information. So, yeah, whatever should not be public based on your data classifications. The most common data classifications you'll see out there are public, proprietary, and confidential. Public means it's available to anybody. It's data classification. Proprietary usually means it's something out there that is only available to a certain select few or group. But if it does get out, it's not damaging. You can get private or confidential, and this means it's sensitive data and it should be restricted to a small set of people within your organization that only have uh, the rights and information to do their jobs and would need to see that. Now, the military has public and then different levels of secret, top secret, etc. through that, and you can look at that too. And these are different things based on data classification. So what are we actually trying to protect out there? So we have our assets that we try to protect, and this is anything you really want to protect. And it could be anything used to conduct a business. Now, what we have are assets of high concern, and these are like business and personnel data, trade secrets, and stuff like that. You know, this the formula for Coca-Cola, that would be an asset of high concern, just the formula itself. Um, a trading algorithm that helps a brokerage firm make fast trades and make money that way. That could be something that would be uh, business and personal data that is of high concern. So what causes network security violations? Accidents, ignorance, and hackers. Now, accidents mean that, I clicked the wrong button, oops, and I try to correct it as soon as possible. Accidents happen. I accidentally, published it to a folder that's open to the public when it was highly, uh, private and, should not have been out there. Ignorance means, oh, yeah, I took my laptop with all the confidential data. I left it unlocked at Starbucks when I went to the bathroom and somebody came in there and they stole it. Oops, my bad. We've all known some people who just didn't realize what they were doing was really dumb. And then hackers are people who that purposefully go out there and try and steal and obtain data that they should not get. So those are some things that we're trying to protect from. And we look at now we come to the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure. And so as we look at an IT infrastructure, you have your user domain. And this is where all of the participants are, the people. That's a user domain. The workstation domain is where all your laptops, your HVDs, anything that your day-to-day workers log into. Your LAN domain is where like you would keep your servers, where you maintain information on, your hubs and stuff like that, your routers between different LANs. Um, by the way, LAN means local area network, and to that. And then we have our LAN to WAN domains, and this is our routers and firewalls that help us connect to external sources outside of our local organizational networks. And our WAN domain is connected to a WAN domain, a wide area network. The most famous and well-known wide area network is called the Internet. Um, Organizations can also have a WAN network. Like a WAN could be something that connects data centers. Say, if you have a data center in, let's say, Atlanta, one in Chicago, one in Phoenix, and they all redundant of each other, and they're all different things for your organization. They could all be connected through private connections, and they could be part of their own WAN network with each of their different LANs located inside of that. Um, you also have the security application domain, and this is where you would have stuff that's internal or external on an intranet or an extranet in type of situation where these are kept private and segmented from your users in your regular WAN domain. You have to have higher level privilege to access information on them, and they're usually controlled on a per session level by those ACLs and DACLs and those permissions we talked about in a couple of slides previous. And finally, we have the remote access domain. This allows you to remotely connect into your work via, some kind of broadband internet connection, usually using either a VPN or some other solution like, say, an HVD or HVA, where you log into a web portal or something. And this communication is usually secured by some kind of IPsec or TLS connectivity. Now, user domain, this refers to the actual users. Users have to accept an acceptable use policy prior to being granted access to an organization. Many of you have always seen that when you've signed on to this, or you connect to our network using one logon or something like that. You'll see that in there. This should focus. The users need to have focus on training, authentication, granular authorization, and detailed accounting. So we need to monitor exactly what's going on. In case something goes on, we can trace and find the source of that. Um, we're not saying that you should become a nanny state and monitor everything they do, but yes, you should monitor everything they do. Uh, you have to have some kind of way to track it down in case if there is an incident or there is something that's going on that might happen in which some kind of wrongdoing occurred. You need to be able to isolate it and prevent it from happening again. And it could be something as simple as an accidental click or something out there like that that could have happened, and uh, something that can be prevented in the future. We also have to prevent against the social engineering aspect. So the biggest threat to any organization usually is uh, that part that is between the keyboard and the chair, the PEPCAC. Problem exists between keyboard and chair, i.e. humans. People, uh, you know, they're susceptible to, being fooled, to being conned, to being manipulated, to, misdirection, confidence games, all that. So there's a lot of things out there where people can be considered the weakest link. Uh, we have the workstation domain. That's where your computers sit, and these are your laptops, your VoIP telephones, your endpoint devices out there. It's best to keep these with anti-malware devices on there or anti-malware security on them. And these include antivirus, anti-spyware, patch management, and all that. And the targets, or the assets are your workstations, your client systems, and your standalone home systems. These could all be targets of hackers trying to gain access to this domain. We have the LAN domain, and this refers to the physical and logical areas used to support the workstations and the organization's network infrastructure. Uh, they can contain, dozens to thousands to hundreds of thousands of hosts, depending on where they're at and the size of the company. Uh, these include the protocols like TCP/IP or application protocols like HTTPS, SFTP, NDM, JDBC, you name it. There can be a lot of things out there. There are also ways to create addressing and TCP/IP addressing of these things, your physical and logical topologies, and communication encryption mechanisms that are all utilized to provide security. Uh, and also that would also include the authentication and authorization systems to provide security too, along with that. Private LANs are a very common target for attacks. So people want to get into your network and then traverse and hop around to see what they can find if there's anything worth stealing. Next, we have the WAN device. It's typically something that's on the internet or a wide area network. It's frequently outsourced by service providers. Like cloud. A lot of cloud instances are considered to be part of the WAN. Uh, WAN domains include things as network items such as your telco communications, uh, from your T1s to T3s to uh, any kind of connectivity device that you're connected to, whether it's a direct connection to a cloud or anything like that. These are all part of the WANs. Equipment includes routers, circuits, switches, firewalls, and their equivalent gear on the other side. Protocols such as TCP/IP are common, and then HTTPS with TLS, addressing schemes, your IP addressing, whether it's private or public IP addressing, and the types of communication encryption, whether it be IPsec or TLS, or something along those lines for that type of encryption. The targets can be, WAN connections that are between locations, especially those controlled by third-party entities. So, if you're going between, like, have a B2B connection with somebody, and you have a direct connection, like a line run by a telco or something, through a publicly switched telco network, it might be easier just to hack into the telco to intercept the communication between the two to get that information from them. So, a lot of times, those can be targets also. Now, your remote access domain is how you dial into your network remotely through a VPN or through actual, encrypted browser, whether you can go through a web portal or something like that. And these are common targets for people to steal information so they can log in. A lot of times people see this, they have Teams on their phone or something like that, or Skype for business on their personal devices. Your personal devices can be a target for this, and people can try and utilize that to grant and gain access to access assets that they should not have control over. Now, as we move on to the system and domain applications, domains, uh, this refers to hardware operating systems, client server, uh, data centers, and stuff like that that are out there. These are targets like servers, hosting application, virtualized systems, databases, computing, where they can, a lot of times people have been able to install Bitcoin mining software on these devices. They try and use it to hijack that, or they go in there to hack data. These are targets of why people want to steal stuff from that, whether it's there or not. These type of things are really where the bread and butter of most hackers go after these. Whether it's to also encrypt these devices and hold them for ransomware, or steal their data and expose it, for activist cause, doesn't matter the motivation. What the goal is of us is to prevent that data from getting out. And there, so what we want to look at are the important security concerns. And these are the network design. Is it a solid network design? Are we having a number of things that can be configured to provide that? Authentication, authorization, and accounting, the AAA of network communications. So are they authorized to gain access? Are they authenticated, prior to that authorization? And are we monitoring and watching where everybody's going once they get in there? So the goals of network security: ensure the confidence of the resources. If we can't trust our network and the data, we can't protect it. So integrity of the data is the second most important at this point. So, encryption for confidentiality. Integrity also provides that there. We need to maintain that availability, and this can include something like having redundant business continuity plans and other things out there, fail-safe failovers for data centers, load balancing of systems among sites, among places. We can also need to ensure the privacy of PII, or personally identifiable information or data, so that this does not have exposure and provide risk to individuals either that are our customers or people that work for us or with us. We need to also have the mechanisms that enforce access control. So a rights management system should be in place that would help create this and these access controls. We need to also have a good monitoring for the environment that would utilize a good SIM. Security incident event monitoring. These are things that are extremely important to be able to get out there and detect for these things. And we also need to be able to support the business tasks and overall mission of the organization. So, am I doing a good job or not? So how do you measure the success of network security? Well, this is always a trick question. So it's like, how well are the stated security goals accomplished? Are people following the rules? Have you laid out the policies and procedures in a clear, understandable, and easy to follow method? Or are you making everything so hard to jump through hoops for that people are looking for loopholes to get around it? So we want to try and get that balance where everything is clearly stated and they can just kind of follow a recipe, for instance, to make that great solution where they can, I have great security and it's not very inconvenient at all. And then you got to make sure that people are following that. And so how well are your security standards maintained? So good network security, it relies on the interweaving of multiple effective components. So do I have a number of different equipment that provides seamless security without interrupting my employees or data flows, or is it making it slower or anything like that? And then you have to have that constant monitoring of things to make sure everything is going well, to make sure there's no aberrations. You can't just put a whole bunch of equipment in your network, configure it, and then forget about it, and not always, review your logs, reviewing your things. If you're not reviewing what's going on and seeing what's happening, you might have discovered you, hey, missed something or didn't even figure out that it was going to be a problem until it was way too late. So security is always an ongoing effort. It's ever vigilance. You always have to be going out there because there's a buzzword that has been in the past called advanced persistent threats. There's always new threats. There's always new uh, issues that are coming out, new vulnerabilities being discovered, new 0 days, new vulnerabilities that are always being presented out there. And you always have to be creating mitigations and countermeasures to address those threats. Security requires that network security professionals, you're always going to have to be learning. I hate to tell you this, but this is not the end of your security and network learning ability. You're always going to have to be continually learning. I have to do it on a daily basis in my job. What are written security policies important? Why do we write everything down? Well, the first thing, it identifies the most important tasks. Now, I'm going to stop. Most security is determined, or our policies are determined based on something else. A, regulations. And why are regulations created? Well, let's start at the beginning. You know, a governing body creates a law that says these must be done. A agency within that government body is tasked with enforcing that law or creating, an ability to determine how that law, what is and what is not in compliance for that law. So once the law is written by a governing body, then you have the agency who takes over, and the agency will then write regulations based on that law. They are authorized by that law to create these regulations. And if these regulations might apply to your business, it would be imperative that policies are created within your organization that are compliant within those regulations. So your policies, internal policies and procedures, need to reflect what is being reflected in those regulations. So based on that, you have a set of criteria that you identify the most important tasks based on those regulations. So you're going to create policies for that. And you're also going to create policies that are, you're going to write down what's common sense. A, if it's confidential, do not leave it out on a desk. Do not leave it sitting on the table of Starbucks without being locked up, while you go to the bathroom for 10 minutes and come back and expect nobody to have read something that's, has confidential blasted off the top of it. These are things you want to prevent from happening. So you got to lay out explicitly what the rules are. You need to provide a common reference, which means you are going to have to define a glossary of what things mean. Like, what is a network? What is a policy element, for instance? What does confidential mean? What does, all these other things. You're going to have to provide a common reference. So if they don't understand that, it's basically talking to the lowest common denominator out there for those that might not have your level of experience and understanding. Policies also have to be measurable. You have to determine whether a policy can be measured as successful by a way of compliance checking. So are they following the policy? And you have to have some kind of way to validate that it is followed. You need to also be able to track that progress, saying, all right, all of our employees are 99% compliant with all of our policies. The policy, if you're successful, it validates what you do. It also validates that the network security that you're providing or any kind of security architecture that's being implemented, any kind of developments that occur within that framework are being maintained and that vigilance is occurring. Uh, the policy also should let you know what you also need to do when you're creating these policies. Where are we lacking at? Where do we have to grow? What is the catch-all policy that says, because I said so, you know? And then you have guides in there how to repair your infrastructure, like an incident response playbook or a business continuity plan or a number of things, where you have what if scenarios for that. Um, so that incident response, planning for the worst. What happens when the proverbial stuff hits the fan and it creates a big stink, spraying stuff all over the place? Well, the first thing to do is you have to know how to respond. And you have to respond to the failure of security breaches or to minimize the damage at all costs and, minimize downtime. So you need to know, and these can be playbooks or different things, checklists, anything that somebody can reference that they need to do this, a way to respond. And this should be written down, printed out, laminated maybe even, put on a shelf. In case the network goes down, you're going to have a playbook of what do I check and how do I go through this. Um, you have to have this list should also have a way to contain those threats, prevent them from spreading. Like, do you have some kind of fail-safe kill chain that occurs? For instance, I was involved in an incident not too long ago where a supplier got breached, and because of the mitigations we created as they got breached, our detection, we trust our vendor in the supply chain, but all of a sudden we also monitor everything that's going on to them. And once we detected something bad was happening, as it tried to go into our network, we were able to hit that prevention and have it automatically kill the connection and disconnect everything from that vendor. So we isolated them from us, and we had a small containment area where they were not allowed to, where it was not allowed to connect to anything else. So we quarantined our little section of it to validate it was not infected. Our intrusion prevention did work, and it kicked off the kill chain, which prevented the spread of the infection from the vendor to us. So these are some things you have to do. You have to have these mechanisms in place to contain the threats, to prevent them. So these could be anything like, say, you have uh, somebody, has a shared home computer, you know, somebody downloaded something and they're connecting and trying to connect into work. You have mandated malware scanning on the system before the VPN is connected. You may do some mandatory checking to make sure they're patched. You want to check the antivirus is run and that they did a virus scan before connecting, or you make them do a virus scan as they're connecting. While they're connecting, they maintain themselves in a quarantine state. And, if they are, infected, they maintain in that quarantine state, and you pop them up and say, hey, you're infected. You can't connect to us anymore. And you provide them instructions on how to maybe wipe their system and clean it up or something like that. And then you also have to have the game plan of cleaning it up. That part of that business continuity where you repair the damage and you return the system to back as normal as possible. So you need to have those all in place for planning for worst case scenarios. Oh, who's responsible? Boom, boom, boom. So, who's the most responsible for this? So, we have senior management as the ultimate and final responsibility for security. This is your CEO, president of the company, your boss's 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 boss, etc. That's the guy in charge. He is the one, the buck stops there. Uh, they must create that environment where a security policy is enforced, understandable, and followed by all employees. And they assign the responsibility for designating, writing, and executing the security plan infrastructure. Now you have your security staff. Those are the ones that manage the asset security, system vulnerabilities, imminent threats, details. They're the ones who have that security control. It may not be security, it could be security IT staff or managerial staff or whatever. And by managerial staff or administrative staff who run administrative duties on systems. And these include they design, execute, and maintain the security with the system. Your security staff helps provide that. Now you have your managers, supervisors. They have the tools and resources that are used to accomplish the work. These are the folks that need to make sure that the security is not tampered with and maintained. They need to ensure that everyone is trained in those security mechanisms to recognize anything that's gone wrong and all that. You have your network administrators who manage the organization's computer resources and network resources, and they ensure responsibility. The resources are used, functional, and available for use. You have your workers out there, and these are your end users, and they need to validate that they can accomplish their work, and they still need to be able to, create products, provide services, perform tasks, input data, and respond to queries, and much more. But they need to understand that they need to maintain that within the parameters of the security rules and policies and procedures. Auditors, these are the guys from outside or from inside that are the watchers. And they look for the problems and violations. They review everything. Most likely auditors were utilized in accounting firms, and they always looked at the books. Well, we have security auditors who look for problems within the network environment or the enterprise environment out there, and they investigate the network looking for places that's non-compliance, that aren't following the rules, and they watch for activities and violations to occur, trends, bottlenecks, stuff like that. They also monitor the systems. So what do we have here? We have the enhanced security of the wireless versus wireless LANs. So wired networks, there's lack of external connectivity that creates physical isolation. So, we have that physical thing. They require physical controls to protect the network, physical access. Keep the doors locked. Keep them out of things. External threats must breach the physical barrier. So that means usually if you have a physical network that is there, somebody has to actually get on site and connect to it. Wireless networks. If there's no external connectivity, if external connectivity, if external connectivity is required, uh, no control is the same as physical isolation. You're a little bit exposed. So you want to do this. You want to create segmentation, and you need to have some kind of screen at that front door where you're connected to, let's say, the internet. Now, wireless networks, they're cheap to deploy. There's no wires run. They're quick, easy to connect to. They're convenient. They support mobility. Ubiquitous. You don't have that tether of a physical cable running into you, so that's always good. And but it also introduces a new attack surface, and they require additional consideration to mitigate attacks. So you don't have to be physically located there. You can be accessed from a distance. An example I give my physical classes, I show them how to use a Pringles can to scan for wireless routers in areas so they can get, directional antennas, basically. And since the data is transmitted over the air, you need to use encryption. You need to use segmentation of your wireless networks. And if you are going into Starbucks or something, you should make them, connect into using a VPN when they connect. Internal and external network issues, we have things like malicious code. We have information leakage, where people, go on, like, say, Reddit and say, I can't believe my company is doing this. And they post something about their company out there that should not be there. You have, let's say, zero-day exploits, where, these are these are things that are not publicly known yet. There are, you know, there is no mitigation for them at this time. There is no patch for them and all that. Unauthorized software is where you have a user who says, I've got a tool that I can get off the internet for free, you know, or I can download some pirated software, to do my work because I want to use, uh, you know, Adobe Photoshop to do this instead of MS Paint because my company's cheap and they won't buy it for me. So I'm going to download a pirated version. So they're putting unauthorized software on your network. That's pretty uncool. And that leads to the next thing, unethical employees. And these are folks who, I know the rules, but, the end justifies the means type of folks who will do whatever it takes to do something that they need to do. And it could lead to other vulnerabilities, such as legal or other things which they may not be aware of. So these are some bad things. And then, of course, if we have a very complex network infrastructure and it's not, known and, you know, observed, you can tell that, these things can be, complex. Complexity leads to accidents, confusion, and stuff like that. So these are things that are always very challenging to deal with. Common threats, the ways to mitigate these threats, rather. So we have things like the hosts and nodes. These are like your workstations, laptops, desktops, your virtual devices that are out there. Your remote PCs and stuff like that. Uh, you have your firewalls, your VPNs, your proxy servers, network address translation, your domain name services, your directory services used for authentication, your IDS IPS solutions, and your network access control. So as we look for these things, the hosted nodes are basically any device that's connected to a network. Your client computer, service router, switches, da 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 da. What we have here is a thing called to limit these from getting on a network. You have media access control or MAC addresses, and these are physical things applied to the network card, physical hardware addresses that are supposed to be unique per manufacturer. Not always the case of them always being unique, but they are there. So then we have a host, and this is a form of a node that has a logical address on it. So we have our physical address, the MAC address, and then we can have a virtual address like a TCP/IP address on there, such as 192.168.10.23 or something. Something as simple as that can be addressed like that. And then on the network layer, as things are connected on the network using that TCP/IP network, uh, these include clients like your workstation, servers, firewalls, proxies, routers, switches, etc. All these different things occur on the network layer. And, well, excuse switches rather. Switches, bridges, and hubs, and physical devices, repeaters, hubs. Those are technically on the network layer. I said switches earlier. Switches can operate in a network layer if they are using what's called VLANs or virtual LANs uh, for that purpose, and they do layer 3 routing. Other things that operate at layer 2 are not considered at the network layer. So switches that are not operating with VLANs in layer 2 mode or layer bridges also act at layer 2 mode. You have other physical devices, repeaters, and hubs that also act at layer 1 and layer 2 modes also. They don't do that. But yeah, that's the one thing I include with network layers. Sometimes switches, they will act in a network layer at times using VLANs and VLAN tagging. Now, firewalls, these are tools that are designed to stop damage. They can either be a physical appliance or they can be a virtual appliance out there. Um, And virtual appliance, I mean, is software based. You can have firewalls that are deployed in the cloud, and as you know, the cloud does not actually have any physical devices. Uh, Technically, that you would have the ability to manipulate or manage. You only manage virtualization in cloud devices. So you can also run virtualized uh, firewalls on your network that are just software products. Um, they're deployed to enforce access controls on policies uh, on network communications. They filter network traffic and they can check for harmful exploits, incursions, data messages, or other events. They protect against a number of threats that come in from the internet. They can download multiple times a day virus signatures and stuff like that. Uh, IP addresses, whitelists, or allow lists. Sometimes they're called. We're trying to get away from terminology like whitelisting and blacklisting because these terms are not very descriptive. We tend to try and focus nowadays on moving something toward allow lists, which is kind of more self-descriptive of something that is allowed to go through the network versus a whitelist, which nobody understands what that really is. Um, it's versus blacklist or block lists. Blacklist is something that we know is being blocked or denied. A block or deny list would be something that would be there versus the terminology blacklist, which doesn't really describe it to certain people who are not technical and wouldn't understand the context of that. So as we work with management, we try and create terminology, newer technology, or reapply terminology to these things so they're more explanatory out there. So these are essential component. You can have network firewalls, which are the most common, and then occasionally you can see like host firewalls, which are basically on your workstation nodes and server nodes out there. That you can see that. Network firewalls are stuff where uh, all network traffic uh, going through 2 points on a um, multi-home system would be have to traverse the firewall. We have virtual private networks, and these are mechanisms for establishing a remote access connection from an endpoint to a controlled network, such as yourself, through an intermediate network, such as the internet. They use tunneling or encapsulation protocols, and these tunneling protocols can encase the original network protocol so it can traverse the intermediate network. Many of them employ encryption so that the original data traverses the intermediate network securely, and they allow for cheap, long distance connections over the internet where it's established. So you can eliminate, those dial-up networking phone calls or anything like that that were utilized in the past. Proxy servers, this is kind of a variation of a proxy server or of a firewall. A lot of times terminology has come out called web application firewalls nowadays. They act as a middleman between a internet or an internal client and the internet and an external server. They kind of utilize NAT most of the time, and they are really focused on content filtering, and most of them are toward web traffic mainly, such as HTML based or JDBC based or something like that, where you have web application protocols that are used for that. Many of them have content storing abilities so you can cache information, and they utilize that to help speed up it. The caching systems are not utilized as much as the internet speeds have gotten a lot faster. Network address translation. This converts internal uh, addresses into public addresses and vice versa. Performs a conversion on packets when leaving the network to mask and modify the internal client's configuration. They prevent external entities from discovering internal your internal IP address and protocols and what your configuration is and how your addressing is. They would only see what's the NAT device and everything else is hidden behind it. Okay. Um, it also reduces the need for public IP addressing. Uh, it enables the use of private IP addresses while still supporting the internet communication and allows the extended use of IPv4. So basically, there's a quick video that's down here. I attached it to module 1. I recommend you watch it. It's like 4.5 minutes. I use some graphics to kind of describe this. So when I'm teaching in the formal class, I usually just try and do stuff on the whiteboard. But since this is online, I really don't have that ability to do that as much here. So an example of a NAT function here, we can see that we have the internal address and internal source port connecting to the NAT proxy or firewall. So it takes that internal address of, we have our internal address of this and our external address of the firewall. And we're trying to go out here to a NAT-PAT firewall here. This has an internal address and external address. So as you can see, what this does is, as this goes out, it's going to it's going to be masked by this address here of 192.168.12.153 going outbound. It's going to change it to the external as it goes through that middle NAT proxy firewall, and the address will be changed to 72.254.249.76. And that system will create a table to that system, and externally it'll just kind of look like it's that, and it'll create a table for that traffic. Watch the video. It does a much better job than this slide does. Next, we have the domain name system. So the domain name system, it's basically a phone book. For those of you who are old enough to know what a phone book is, a phone book is where you'd see a name and a phone number. And it was a big book that was published and delivered to people's doorsteps, up until, like, say, the mid 2000s, I would say. So basically, this is just a mapping of fully qualified domain names to IP addresses out there on the internet. So without DNS, users would have to maintain a list of all IP addresses that they wanted to visit. In the early days of ARPANET and the internet, everyone had host files, and they would just keep a list of a text file on their system that would have, everybody's address and how to connect to them. And that's where host files. So eventually, as the internet started getting bigger and bigger, the domain name system was created, and they created a query-based system that would provide plain text communication, listing of how things connect to each other. Next we have is directory services. This is an index network. It helps users locate resources within a private network. It's responsible for keeping track of which servers are online and resources that are available that are being shared on the network. This also operates very much like a telephone book for phone numbers and addresses. These can be used in conjunction. Directory services also utilize DNS a lot for that, but they communicate most of the time using LDAP protocol or LDAP-S, being secure protocol. These are essential pieces of modern networks that provide security services and focus on authentication and provide authorization for rights management to a lot of systems within the network. Now, we have intrusion systems and intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems. Now, an IDS is a system that watches internal hosts or networks for symptoms of compromises. It serves as a complementary mechanism to firewalls. Now, if you want to laugh, I included a video. Anyway, there's a really fun video that's attached in there that you should watch about security monitoring. That's essentially what an IDS does. It lets you know that you're being robbed. We have IPS out there, and this is kind of like a mechanism that strives to detect an attack, and then it actually acts to prevent an attack. It becomes the first layer of uh, initial layer of defense because once you detect it, it can initiate what's called a kill chain, and it provides that way to stop that traffic from occurring or coming in. So IDSs and IPSs may not be able to detect things that they are not aware of, such as zero-day attacks and false positives. They can generate a lot of false positives, so um, you know I've had to deal with false positives in the past, and they're not fun because you have to jump through hoops to show that it's not really a bad thing. And if it is a zero-day attack, oopsie, you just, you know, lost. So hopefully you have to be vigilant and maintain the right stuff out there for that if you can. Network access control. This is the limit of addressing. This is kind of like how I talked about access control list uh, addressing. This is based on permissions, essentially, where you have lists of addresses that are allowed to make that connection based on security compliance of a host, whether they're going to quarantine or not. So, based on their MAC address or based on their IP addresses, they are allowed to get on the main network, or they must be relegated to, let's say, a quarantine network. They also ensure that all hosts connecting must have the security configuration. Or do they have the latest malware version installed? Are they have updated malware signatures installed? Do they have are all their patches installed? These are a number of vigilant checks you can do on these systems prior to letting them into your network. If they are not, you can have them be blocked or restricted if they don't have these systems on there. And you can leave them unauthorized to connect until they do have the current software that they are needed. So this kind of is an automated way to enforce these rules in an automated way. So you can't say, well, Joe told me I could connect anyway. No. This takes the human factor out of the equation. These devices say, hey, you need to do this, and until you do, you're not allowed to get on the system. So these are out there specifically designed for just that purpose. All right. So now we come to the TCP/IP basics. The knowledge of TCP/IP is really necessary for network security um, in these areas. If you ever want to work on a firewall, routers and switches, help maintaining availability, uh, troubleshooting network performance, managing network traffic, any kind of network administration, protocol analysis. If you want to forensically analyze protocols, if you want to understand vulnerabilities and exploits from a network perspective, if you want to do penetration testing or red teaming or ethical hacking, you really need to understand TCP/IP. Most networks include the internet. It's hard to find anything other than like missile command that's not connected to the internet. Uh, but these are things most of them use IPv4, and IPv6 is growing a lot. You're seeing it being distributed to a lot of different networks and folks out there. So knowing TCP/IP is fairly important, and understanding how these work is really necessary to utilize that moving forward. Right, this is the OSI model. There's no mnemonic I used to know to help me memorize this, and that was all people seem to need data processing. This represents application, presentation, session, transport, network, data link, and physical. These are all different elements of how different traffic is developed. So the physical is the actual bits and bytes of data that are connected to the network, and the data link, the frame, the packet, the segments, and then up top from the session to the application are the PDU. So these are very important to have memorized, and these are mainly covered in other courses, but just as something to memorize, it's here there for you. As we move on from the OSI model, we look at some of the different subprotocols. TCP/IP somewhat aligns with the OSI model, but we have other things on here. So subprotocols of TCP/IP are the IP and transmission control protocol for that. Also within TCP/IP are the user datagram protocol. And then we have other protocols such as ARP, Address Resolution Protocol, ICMP. We have application layer protocols such as HTTPS or HTTP. We have transport layer protocols such as TLS for encryption. And a lot of these can be found on a list from IANA. We look at the headers and payloads of many packets. When you're analyzing network traffic, you look at four main headers. The first one is the Ethernet header, and that is found in the data link layer. The IP header is the packet in the network layer, and that's where you find the addressing information, physical addresses in the Ethernet header. The TCP header kind of tells you what the segment is in the session layer, and then the UDP header is a segment from the transport layer also. So these are things you want to look at when analyzing network traffic. Looking to analyze network traffic, you want to focus on filtering on IP addresses. Say you want to look at the things between two different network segments or two different hosts. You would filter on like address length, the available addresses capacity to meet the need for unique subnetting, and filtering masking, see if they're going across a router or something, determine are they on the same physical logical subnet and such like that. So focusing maybe on the IP address or port number to help, make a allow decision or deny decision when creating your firewall rules or network ACLs or something like that you want to do. Depends on where you may do it at. So a firewall, you may create a filter on whether you have a address that is known or unknown. Address is known to be benign, or if it sends something that is known to be malicious. So this would be something like an allow list or deny list in a firewall. And you can also determine if an address is real or spoofed based on where the traffic may originate from. Summarize, what we've talked about today was a lot of stuff, and this has been a fairly long lecture. And thank you for staying with me for this. But we've talked about the 7 domains of network security goals, internal and external network security issues, and network security components used to mitigate threats throughout the IP infrastructure, and the basics of TCP/IP control protocol. Thank you, and I'll talk to you in Chapter 2 lecture.